The emergency room doors burst open with a force that made every head turn. Mico Rodriguez looked up from the patient chart he was reviewing, his experienced eyes immediately assessing the chaos unfolding before him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A young woman, clearly in the final stages of pregnancy, was being rushed in on a stretcher, her face pale and contorted with pain. Behind her, a woman in an expensive business suit followed frantically, her designer heels clicking against the hospital floor like a desperate metronome. "Get Dr. Harrison now!" shouted the paramedic as they wheeled the stretcher past Mico's station. 22-year-old female, 38 weeks pregnant, collapsed at a corporate meeting. Blood pressure spiking, possible preeclampsia. Mico didn't hesitate. After 8 years working the emergency department at Riverside General Hospital, he had learned to trust his instincts. Something about this situation demanded his immediate attention. He fell in to step beside the stretcher, his trained hands already reaching for the patient's wrist to check her pulse while his eyes scanned her vital signs on the monitor. The young woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with terror. "My baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the commotion. "Please, someone help my baby." "We've got you," Mico said firmly, his voice carrying the calm authority that had comforted countless patients over the years. "What's your name?" "Isabella," she managed to gasp. "Isabella Thompson." The name Thompson hit Mico like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. Everyone in the city knew that name, Victoria Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, one of the largest tech companies on the West Coast. The woman following behind them had to be her mother, the same Victoria Thompson whose face graced business magazine covers and whose company employed half the city. But there was something else about the young woman on the stretcher that made Mico's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Something familiar in the curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, even through the haze of pain and fear. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on what mattered most in this moment. Dr. Harrison appeared at the trauma bay door, his surgical scrub still bearing traces of his previous case. "What do we have?" "Isabella Thompson, 38 weeks, blood pressure 160/110 and climbing. Pulse is 120, baby's heart rate showing signs of distress." As they transferred Isabella to the hospital bed, Mico caught sight of the older woman hovering in the doorway. Victoria Thompson looked nothing like the confident businesswoman from the newspapers. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from tears she was trying desperately not to shed. Her hands shook as she clutched a leather briefcase like a lifeline. "Please," Victoria said, cracking, "she's all I have left. Her father died 2 years ago. She's everything to me." The next 20 minutes felt like hours to Mico as he worked alongside Dr. Harrison to stabilize Isabella. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and it became clear that an emergency cesarean section would be necessary to save both mother and baby. As they prepped for surgery, Mico found himself studying Isabella's face more closely, that nagging sense of recognition growing stronger with each passing moment. "Have we met before?" he asked gently as they wheeled her toward the operating room. It was an unusual question for a medical professional to ask during an emergency, but something compelled him to voice it. Isabella's eyes, heavy with medication, focused on him with effort. "I don't think so," she whispered. "But your voice, it sounds familiar somehow." Victoria Thompson had been relegated to the waiting room, where she paced like a caged animal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Mico had seen countless worried relatives over the years, but there was something particularly heartbreaking about watching this powerful woman reduced to helplessness in the face of her daughter's crisis. Through the glass partition, he could see her making phone calls, probably canceling important meetings and rearranging her empire to be here for Isabella. In the operating room, Dr. Harrison worked with practiced precision while Mico assisted, monitoring both patients' vital signs and ensuring everything proceeded smoothly. The surgery was complicated by Isabella's elevated blood pressure, but gradually the team brought it under control. "Almost there," Dr. Harrison murmured, his concentration absolute. "Mico, prepare for delivery." When the baby finally emerged, a healthy cry filling the sterile room, Mico felt his knees nearly buckle. The infant, pink and perfect, had distinctive features that made his heart race with impossible recognition. But dark hair, the shape of the nose, the way the tiny fingers moved. It was like looking at photographs of his own daughter, Sophia, when she was born 6 years ago. But that was impossible. Mico had never met Isabella Thompson before today. He was certain of it. Yet as he held the newborn, carefully cleaning and examining the baby boy, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at family. "He's beautiful," Isabella breathed as they placed her son on her chest. Even exhausted from surgery, her face glowed with maternal love. "Thank you all so much." Dr. Harrison began closing the incision while Mico continued monitoring both patients. Everything had gone well, better than they had hoped given the emergency circumstances. But as he watched Isabella hold her son, Mico's mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. The resemblance was too strong to be coincidence, yet he had no explanation for it. When they finally wheeled Isabella to recovery, Victoria Thompson was waiting, tears streaming down her face as she saw her daughter and new grandson for the first time. The transformation in the businesswoman was remarkable. Gone was the intimidating CEO, replaced by a grandmother overwhelmed with relief and joy. "He's perfect," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." As Mico updated Isabella's chart and ensured she was comfortable, he couldn't help but notice how Victoria's entire demeanor had softened. She sat beside her daughter's bed, one hand gently stroking the baby's hair, looking more vulnerable than he had ever seen any executive look. It was then that Victoria looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You helped save them both." "Just doing my job," Mico replied modestly, though he felt anything but modest about what had just transpired. The mystery of the familiar-looking baby continued to gnaw at him, and he found himself reluctant to leave their side. 3 days had passed since the emergency delivery, and Mico found himself checking on Isabella Thompson more frequently than his duties strictly required. Each time he entered her private room on the maternity ward, he was struck again by how the baby's features seemed to mirror something deeply familiar. The infant, whom Isabella had named Gabriel, had his mother's gentle temperament, but possessed physical characteristics that made Mico's chest tighten with unspoken questions. Isabella was recovering well from the surgery, her blood pressure stabilizing and her natural radiance returning day by day. She had proven to be unlike any wealthy patient Mico had encountered during his years at Riverside General. Instead of demanding special treatment or complaining about hospital accommodations, she expressed genuine gratitude for every small gesture of care. When Mico brought her ice chips or adjusted her pillows, she thanked him as if he were performing extraordinary acts of kindness rather than routine nursing duties. "You don't have to keep checking on us so often," Isabella said with a soft smile as Mico entered to review her afternoon medication schedule. She was sitting up in bed, cradling Gabriel while sunlight streamed through the large windows overlooking the hospital's garden courtyard. "I'm sure you have many other patients who need your attention." Mico paused in his chart review, struck by her consideration. Most patients, particularly those from prominent families, expected constant attention and immediate responses to every request. Isabella's awareness of his workload and concern for other patients revealed a maturity and empathy that seemed beyond her 22 years. "Actually, you're one of my easier patients," he replied honestly. "Some people in your position would have demanded a private nurse by now." "My mother probably would have arranged exactly that if I'd asked. She's been trying to transfer me to some exclusive medical center across town since the day after Gabriel was born. She means well, but sometimes I think she forgets that good care isn't always about expensive facilities." This insight into Isabella's character intrigued Mico further. Despite being raised in wealth and privilege, she possessed a groundedness that spoke to values beyond material comfort. As he watched her gently adjust Gabriel's blanket, he noticed again the baby's distinctive features. The dark eyebrows, the way his tiny nose curved slightly to the left, the particular shape of his earlobes. All of it reminded Mico so strongly of his own daughter, Sophia, that he had to resist the urge to pull out his phone and compare photographs. "He's going to be handsome like his father," Mico commented, hoping to learn more about Gabriel's paternity without seeming intrusive. Isabella's expression clouded momentarily, a shadow of sadness crossing her features. "His father doesn't know about Gabriel yet. It's complicated." She shifted her gaze to the window, where clouds were gathering over the city skyline. "We were together for about a year, but things ended before I knew I was pregnant. By the time I found out, he had already moved away for work. I tried to reach him, but his phone was disconnected and I didn't have any other way to contact him." The story tugged at Mico's heart, reminding him of his own complicated past. His daughter Sophia's mother had left when Sophia was barely 2 years old, claiming she wasn't ready for the responsibilities of parenthood. The parallels between his situation and Isabella's were striking, though from opposite perspectives. "Have you thought about trying to find him?" Mico asked gently. "With social media and online searches, it's often possible to reconnect with people." Isabella nodded slowly. "I've tried everything I can think of. His name is Mico Rodriguez. He was working as a paramedic here in the city, but apparently he transferred to another hospital system somewhere else. The only thing I really remember clearly is that he had a young daughter from a previous relationship, a little girl named Sophia." The chart slipped from Mico's hands, clattering to the floor as the impossible became suddenly, devastatingly possible. Mico Rodriguez, Sophia. The timeline matched perfectly with when he had left the city 2 years ago, taking a position at Riverside General after his previous relationship had ended badly. He had been working as a paramedic then, before transitioning to nursing. The woman he had dated during that turbulent period had been someone he had met at a hospital fundraising event, someone young, beautiful, and kind, whose father had recently died, leaving her struggling to find her place in the world. "Are you all right?" Isabella asked with concern, noticing his sudden pallor. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Mico bent to retrieve the fallen chart, his mind racing as memory after memory crashed over him. The fundraising gala where he'd met a grieving young woman who'd recently lost her father. The whirlwind romance that had provided comfort during his own difficult transition period following his ex-wife's departure. The way she had always seemed nervous about introducing him to her family. How she had mentioned her mother being very protective and having big plans for Isabella. High expectations for her relationships. The abrupt end to their relationship when his work schedule and single father responsibilities had proven incompatible with her need for stability during her own grief. He had known her as Bella then, just Bella. She had never mentioned her last name, and he had been too caught up in his own emotional healing to press for details about her family or background. The expensive clothes and jewelry should have been clues, but he had attributed them to good taste rather than wealth. She had always insisted on meeting at modest restaurants or his apartment, never suggesting they visit her home. "I'm fine," Mico managed to say, though his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. "Just felt a little dizzy for a moment." As he looked at Isabella now, really looked at her, he could see past the 2 years that had transformed her from a grieving 20-year-old into a mature young mother. The same eyes that had captivated him during long conversations over coffee. The same laugh that had helped him remember how to find joy again during one of the darkest periods of his life. The same gentle way of touching his arm when she wanted to emphasize a point. "Isabella," he said carefully, his heart pounding, "did you ever go by a different name? A nickname, maybe?" She tilted her head curiously. "My friends and family call me Bella. I only use Isabella for formal situations. Why do you ask?" The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. This was Bella, his Bella, the woman he had fallen in love with during those precious months when they had both been healing from loss and heartbreak. The woman whose absence had left him questioning whether he was capable of maintaining a relationship while being a single father. The woman who was now holding his son. Gabriel, his son. The baby whose familiar features now made perfect sense because they were a combination of his own genetics and Bella's. The dark hair came from him, the nose shape from her, the distinctive eyebrows a perfect blend of both parents. Mico? Isabella's voice seemed to come from very far away. You really don't look well. Should I call for another nurse? He forced himself to focus on her concerned face, noting how she had unconsciously used his first name rather than the formal address most patients employed. Some part of her recognized him too, even if her conscious mind hadn't made the connection yet. I need to tell you something, he began, then stopped. How could he possibly explain this situation? How could he tell her that the father she had been searching for was standing right here, that he had been caring for her and their son without realizing who they were? Before he could find the words, Victoria Thompson appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore another expensive business suit, this one in navy blue with subtle pinstripes, and carried herself with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Good afternoon, Victoria said crisply, acknowledging Mico with a brief nod before focusing entirely on her daughter. How are you feeling today, darling? I've arranged for Dr. Pemberton from Westside Medical to consult on your case. He's supposed to be the best maternal health specialist in the state. Isabella sighed softly. Mom, I'm fine. The doctors here have been wonderful, and my recovery is progressing exactly as it should. There's no need for outside consultants. Victoria's gaze swept the hospital room with barely concealed disapproval. This is adequate for emergency care, but for ongoing treatment, you deserve the finest facilities available. I've also looked into private nursing services that could provide round-the-clock care once you're released. I don't need round-the-clock care, Isabella replied with patient firmness, and I certainly don't need the finest facilities. What I need is to rest, bond with my son, and figure out how to be a good mother. Mico watched this exchange with growing understanding of the family dynamics at play. Victoria's love for her daughter was evident, but it manifested as an overwhelming desire to shield Isabella from any discomfort or challenge through financial solutions. Isabella, meanwhile, seemed to crave normalcy and genuine human connection rather than luxury and isolation. Have you given any more thought to what we discussed about Gabriel's father? Victoria asked, lowering her voice slightly. I've contacted the best private investigators in the city. They specialize in locating individuals for family reunification cases. Isabella glanced at Mico, then back at her mother. I told you, I want to handle that myself when I'm ready. It's not something that can be rushed or forced. Victoria's expression softened marginally. I just want to ensure he takes responsibility for his child. Gabriel deserves financial security and a father figure who will be present in his life. What if he doesn't want that responsibility? Isabella asked quietly. What if he's moved on and started a new life? Maybe there's a reason he left without leaving contact information. Mico felt each word like a physical blow. She was talking about him, speculating about his motivations and choices based on incomplete information. He wanted to interrupt, to explain that he had never known about Gabriel, that he would never have abandoned his child if he had been aware of the pregnancy. But the complexity of the situation paralyzed him. How could he possibly explain this situation now, in front of Victoria Thompson, without appearing to have deceived them all along? How could he tell her that the father she had been searching for was standing right here, that he had been caring for her and their son without realizing who they were? Before he could find the words, Victoria Thompson appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore another expensive business suit, this one in navy blue with subtle pinstripes, and carried herself with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Good afternoon, Victoria said crisply, acknowledging Mico with a brief nod before focusing entirely on her daughter. How are you feeling today, darling? I've arranged for Dr. Pemberton from Westside Medical to consult on your case. He's supposed to be the best maternal health specialist in the state. Isabella sighed softly. Mom, I'm fine. The doctors here have been wonderful, and my recovery is progressing exactly as it should. There's no need for outside consultants. Victoria's gaze swept the hospital room with barely concealed disapproval. This is adequate for emergency care, but for ongoing treatment, you deserve the finest facilities available. I've also looked into private nursing services that could provide round-the-clock care once you're released. I don't need round-the-clock care, Isabella replied with patient firmness, and I certainly don't need the finest facilities. What I need is to rest, bond with my son, and figure out how to be a good mother. Mico watched this exchange with growing understanding of the family dynamics at play. Victoria's love for her daughter was evident, but it manifested as an overwhelming desire to shield Isabella from any discomfort or challenge through financial solutions. Isabella, meanwhile, seemed to crave normalcy and genuine human connection rather than luxury and isolation. "Have you given any more thought to what we discussed about Gabriel's father?" Victoria asked, lowering her voice slightly. "I've contacted the best private investigators in the city. They specialize in locating individuals for family reunification cases." Isabella glanced at Mico, then back at her mother. "I told you, I want to handle that myself when I'm ready. It's not something that can be rushed or forced." Victoria's expression softened marginally. "I just want to ensure he takes responsibility for his child. Gabriel deserves financial security and a father figure who will be present in his life." "What if he doesn't want that responsibility?" Isabella asked quietly. "What if he's moved on and started a new life? Maybe there's a reason he left without leaving contact information." Mico felt each word like a physical blow. She was talking about him, speculating about his motivations and choices based on incomplete information. He wanted to interrupt, to explain that he had never known about Gabriel, that he would never have abandoned his child if he had been aware of the pregnancy. But the complexity of the situation paralyzed him. How could he possibly explain this situation now, in front of Victoria Thompson, without appearing to have deceived them all along? How could he tell her that the father she had been searching for was standing right here, that he had been caring for her and their son without realizing who they were? Before he could find the words, Victoria Thompson appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore another expensive business suit, this one in navy blue with subtle pinstripes, and carried herself with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. "Good afternoon," Victoria said crisply, acknowledging Mico with a brief nod before focusing entirely on her daughter. "How are you feeling today, darling? I've arranged for Dr. Pemberton from Westside Medical to consult on your case. He's supposed to be the best maternal health specialist in the state." Isabella sighed softly. "Mom, I'm fine. The doctors here have been wonderful, and my recovery is progressing exactly as it should. There's no need for outside consultants." Victoria's gaze swept the hospital room with barely concealed disapproval. "This is adequate for emergency care, but for ongoing treatment, you deserve the finest facilities available. I've also looked into private nursing services that could provide round-the-clock care once you're released." "I don't need round-the-clock care," Isabella replied with patient firmness. Forcing himself to focus on her concerned face. Sophia had inherited his dark eyes and serious expression, but her mother's quick smile that could brighten any room when she was happy. "Maybe you should take some medicine, like when I had that bad cough," Sophia suggested with the innocent logic of childhood. "Remember how the doctor said rest was the best medicine?" Her simple wisdom hit him harder than any medical textbook or professional advice could have. He was making himself sick with indecision, and worse, he was allowing it to affect the one person who depended on him most. Sophia deserved better than a father consumed by secrets and uncertainty. That afternoon at the hospital, Mico's resolve to maintain distance crumbled when he encountered Isabella in the corridor outside the neonatal intensive care unit. She was carrying Gabriel in a small carrier, looking exhausted but radiant in the way new mothers often did. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a soft sweater instead of the hospital gowns he had grown accustomed to seeing her in. "Mico," she said with genuine pleasure upon seeing him. "I was hoping I'd run into you. Gabriel has been fussing during his checkups with the other nurses, but he always seems so calm when you're around." The observation sent a jolt through Mico's chest. Of course Gabriel responded to him differently. Babies possessed an instinctive recognition of biological connections even when the adults around them remained oblivious. Every time Mico held his son, Gabriel's tiny body relaxed in a way that suggested comfort and familiarity. "How are you adjusting to life at home?" Mico asked, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the elevator bank. Isabella's expression grew complicated. "It's wonderful and overwhelming at the same time. My mother has hired a night nurse, a day nurse, a nutritionist, and a baby development specialist. Sometimes I feel like I need an appointment to spend time with my own son." The frustration in her voice was unmistakable. Mico recognized the same struggle he had witnessed in the hospital room between Isabella's desire for normal experiences and Victoria's determination to provide the most expensive solutions to every challenge. "That sounds suffocating," Mico said carefully. "It is," Isabella admitted. "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for her help and support, but sometimes I wonder if Gabriel will grow up thinking that love means hiring professionals instead of just being present." They reached the elevator, and as they waited, Mico noticed how Gabriel's eyes followed his movements. The baby's gaze was alert and focused in a way that seemed advanced for his age. When Mico unconsciously reached out to adjust Gabriel's blanket, the infant's tiny hand grasped his finger with surprising strength. "He really does like you," Isabella observed with a soft smile. "You're a natural with babies. Do you have children of your own?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Mico felt his heart racing as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't be an outright lie, but also wouldn't reveal the truth he wasn't ready to share. "I have a daughter, Sophia. She's 6 years old." "That's wonderful," Isabella replied warmly. "I'd love to meet her sometime. Is she with her mother?" "No, it's just Sophia and me. Her mother left when Sophia was very young." Isabella's expression immediately filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult, raising a child on your own." "It was," Mico admitted. "Still is, some days. But Sophia is amazing. She's made me a better person." The elevator arrived, and as they stepped inside, Mico shifted Gabriel to his other arm. The movement caused the baby to fuss slightly, and without thinking, Mico made a soft shushing sound that immediately calmed him. The response was so automatic, so natural paternal, that Isabella stared at him with curious surprise. "How did you know to do that? The nurses have been trying different techniques all week to soothe him when he gets fussy." Mico's mouth felt dry. "Experience with Sophia, I guess. Some things become instinctive after a while." When the elevator reached the ground floor, Isabella hesitated before stepping out. "Mico, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "The relationship you mentioned, with Sophia's mother, how long were you together before she left?" The question felt like walking into a minefield. Mico chose his words carefully, aware that anything he said might trigger recognition or suspicion. "About 8 months. It was during a difficult time in my life. I had just changed jobs and was dealing with some personal issues. She was going through her own challenges too. Looking back, I think we were both trying to heal from other losses, and maybe we weren't really ready for the kind of commitment that raising a child together requires." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if circumstances had been different? If you had both been in better emotional places? The irony of the question nearly broke Mico's composure. Here was Isabella, unknowingly asking him to speculate about their own failed relationship while holding their child in her arms. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "But I've learned that dwelling on what-ifs doesn't change anything. You have to focus on what's real and what's in front of you." They walked through the hospital lobby together, past the gift shop and coffee stand where Mico had grabbed countless quick meals during long shifts. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the large windows created patterns on the polished floor, and Mico found himself memorizing these details, sensing that this moment of easy conversation might be one of the last they shared before everything changed. "I should probably head home," Isabella said as they reached the main entrance. "Gabriel needs to eat, and I promised my mother I'd review some documents she wants me to sign regarding the baby's trust fund." "Trust fund?" Mico couldn't help but ask. Isabella's cheeks flushed slightly. "My mother believes in planning for every contingency. She's already set up college funds, healthcare accounts, and various investments for Gabriel's future. It's incredibly generous, but sometimes I feel like she's trying to compensate for his father's absence with money." The comment hit Mico like a physical blow. Victoria Thompson was making financial provisions for Gabriel based on the assumption that his father was absent by choice, unwilling to take responsibility for his child. The reality was far more complex, but Mico realized that from their perspective, his apparent abandonment looked exactly like deliberate neglect. "What if his father didn't know?" Mico asked quietly. "What if there was some misunderstanding or miscommunication?" Isabella considered this possibility, her expression growing thoughtful. "I've wondered about that too. When I tried to contact him after I found out I was pregnant, his phone was disconnected and I couldn't find any forwarding information. Maybe he never got my messages." "Did you try reaching out through his workplace?" "I did, but they said he had transferred to another hospital system and couldn't provide contact information due to privacy policies. I even hired a private investigator, but he couldn't locate him either." She paused, then continued with obvious reluctance. "Part of me wonders if he deliberately made himself difficult to find. Maybe he suspected I might try to contact him and didn't want the complications of a relationship from his past affecting his new life." Each word felt like another nail in Mico's coffin of guilt. Isabella had tried to reach him, had made genuine efforts to include him in Gabriel's life, and his own legitimate job transfer and phone changes had created the appearance of deliberate neglect. Deliberate avoidance. The truth was that he had been so focused on starting fresh at Riverside General and creating stability for Sophia that he hadn't maintained connections with his previous life. "Maybe he would want to know about Gabriel if he could be reached," Mico suggested carefully. "Maybe," Isabella agreed. "But it's been 2 years since we were together, and now Gabriel is here. I can't spend my life wondering about someone who may not want to be found." As they prepared to part ways in the hospital parking garage, Gabriel began to cry. Isabella tried several positions and rocking motions, but the baby's distress only increased. Without thinking, Mico reached out and gently took Gabriel from her arms. "May I?" he asked, though he was already supporting the baby against his chest. Gabriel's crying stopped almost immediately. He settled against Mico's shoulder with a contented sigh, his tiny body relaxing completely. The natural ease of the interaction, the way Gabriel molded himself against Mico's body as if he belonged there, created a moment of such profound recognition that Isabella stared at them both with undisguised amazement. "That's incredible," she breathed. "He's never done that with anyone else, not even the pediatric specialists my mother hired." Mico felt Gabriel's steady breathing against his neck, the warm weight of his son in his arms, and knew that he could no longer maintain this charade. The baby deserved to know his father, Isabella deserved to know the truth, and Mico could no longer live with the deception that circumstances had forced upon him. But before he could find the words to explain everything, Victoria Thompson's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Isabella, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Victoria approached them with her characteristic brisk efficiency, but her steps slowed when she noticed Gabriel sleeping peacefully in Mico's arms. Her eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the scene with the calculating intelligence that had made her a successful business leader. "I see Gabriel has taken quite a liking to you," Victoria observed, her tone carefully neutral, but with an undercurrent that suggested she found this development noteworthy. "He was fussy, and Mico has a way with babies," Isabella explained quickly, perhaps sensing some tension in her mother's demeanor. Victoria's gaze moved between Mico and Gabriel, her expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "How interesting. Gabriel is usually quite particular about who he allows to hold him." The way she emphasized the word particular sent a chill down Mico's spine. Victoria Thompson hadn't built a business empire by missing subtle details or failing to recognize patterns. She was clearly beginning to suspect that Mico's connection to Gabriel went beyond professional nursing care. "We should probably head home," Victoria continued, extending her arms towards Gabriel. "I have a conference call with the London office in an hour." But when Mico attempted to transfer Gabriel to Victoria's arms, the baby immediately began crying again. The contrast was so stark, so undeniably significant, that all three adults stood frozen in awkward silence. "Perhaps you should carry him to the car," Victoria suggested to Mico, her voice carrying a new edge that hadn't been there moments before. As they walked through the parking garage together, Mico felt the weight of Victoria's scrutiny like a physical presence. She was studying every interaction between him and Gabriel, cataloging every response and reaction. He realized with growing dread that his time for voluntary disclosure was rapidly running out. Victoria Thompson was going to figure out the truth, and when she did, she would control how and when that information was revealed. The moment of reckoning he had been avoiding was no longer a matter of choice. It was an approaching storm, and he had run out of places to hide. Victoria Thompson had always prided herself on reading people like financial statements, and the equation in front of her wasn't adding up. 3 days after the parking garage incident, she sat in her corner office on the 35th floor of Thompson Industries, staring at a private investigator's report that had arrived that morning. The document contained detailed background information on Mico Rodriguez, including employment history, personal relationships, and family details. The timeline was damning. 2 years ago, Mico had worked as a paramedic for Metro Emergency Services. He had left that position abruptly, citing personal reasons, and relocated to take his current nursing job at Riverside General. The gap in his employment history coincided perfectly with the period when Isabella had been trying desperately to contact Gabriel's father, a man named Mico Rodriguez, who had worked as a paramedic. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She had built her empire on decisive action and controlling outcomes, but this situation threatened to unravel everything she had worked to protect since her husband's death. Isabella was finally healing, finally finding her way as a mother, and now this man who had abandoned her daughter was somehow back in their lives, pretending to be a caring nurse while concealing his true identity. The deception felt like a personal betrayal. Victoria had trusted Mico with her daughter's care, had witnessed Isabella's growing comfort with him, and even begun to respect his professional competence and gentle manner. To discover that he had been manipulating them all along ignited a fury that she hadn't felt since the business rivals who had tried to force her out after Richard's death. She scheduled an emergency meeting with her legal team for that afternoon, then called Isabella's penthouse apartment. "Mother, is everything all right?" Isabella's voice carried concern. "You sound upset." "I need you to meet me at my office immediately. Bring Gabriel. There's something we need to discuss about his father." The 2-hour wait for Isabella's arrival felt like an eternity. Victoria paced her office, alternating between reviewing the investigator's findings and staring out at the city skyline where Riverside General's distinctive tower was visible in the distance. She had always believed that money and power could solve any problem, but this situation required a delicacy she wasn't sure she possessed. When Isabella finally arrived, carrying Gabriel in his carrier and looking puzzled by the urgency of the summons, Victoria gestured towards the leather chairs arranged around the coffee table in her office's informal meeting area. "Isabella, I need you to prepare yourself for some difficult information," Victoria began, her voice carefully controlled. "I've been investigating Gabriel's father, and I've discovered something that's going to be very hard to hear." Isabella's face paled, but she maintained her composure as she settled Gabriel's carrier beside her chair. "You found him?" "In a manner of speaking." Victoria handed Isabella the investigator's report, watching carefully as she began to read. She saw the exact moment when recognition dawned, when the pieces fell into place and Isabella's world shifted on its axis. "This can't be right," she whispered, her hands shaking as she held the documents. "Mico couldn't be. He would have said something. He's been caring for us, helping with Gabriel. Why would he keep this secret?" Victoria's anger flared at her daughter's continued faith in the man who had deceived them. "Because he's been manipulating the situation from the beginning. Think about it, Isabella. What are the odds that Gabriel's father would just happen to be working at the hospital where you were taken for emergency delivery? He's been playing some kind of game with us." "That doesn't make sense," Isabella protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Mico isn't manipulative. He's kind and genuine. There has to be some explanation." "The explanation is that he saw an opportunity," Victoria said harshly. "You're a Compson. He probably realized who you were and decided to position himself to make some kind of claim on Gabriel or on our family's resources."
Stood abruptly, beginning to pace in much the same manner her mother had been doing earlier. Gabriel stirred in his carrier, sensing the tension in the room, and began to make soft fussing sounds. "I need to talk to him," Isabella said finally. "I need to hear his side of this before I make any judgments." "Absolutely not," Victoria replied sharply. "I've already contacted our legal team. They're preparing a restraining order and exploring our options for protecting Gabriel from any custody claims." "Mother, you can't just make these decisions without consulting me," Isabella said, her voice rising with uncharacteristic anger. "Gabriel is my son, and if Mico is his father, then he has rights." "Rights?" Victoria's voice became dangerously quiet. "He abandoned you when you needed him most. He let you go through pregnancy alone, let you face the terrifying emergency delivery without any support from him. He watched you struggle as a new mother while pretending to be a stranger. What rights does that kind of behavior deserve?" Isabella stopped pacing and faced her mother directly. "Maybe he didn't know? Maybe there's a reasonable explanation for why he couldn't be reached." "There's no explanation that justifies what he's done since Gabriel was born," Victoria shot back. "He's had dozens of opportunities to reveal his identity, and instead he chose to deceive us. That shows a fundamental lack of character and integrity." The argument was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Victoria's assistant entered apologetically. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Mr. Rodriguez here to see you. He says it's urgent and concerns your daughter and grandson." Victoria and Isabella exchanged glances, both recognizing that Mico had somehow learned about their discovery. Victoria's first instinct was to have him removed from the building, but Isabella spoke first. "Send him in," she said quietly. "Isabella, I don't think that's wise," Victoria warned. "I need to hear what he has to say," Isabella replied firmly. "I owe myself that much." When Mico entered the office, the change in his appearance was immediately apparent. The confident, caring nurse they had known was replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usual neat appearance was disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, and his hands shook slightly as he approached them. "Isabella," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I know you found out who I am. I came here to explain before you heard it from anyone else." "You're a little late for that," Victoria interjected coldly. "We already know everything we need to know about your deception." Mico's gaze moved between mother and daughter, settling finally on Isabella's face. "I never meant for it to happen this way. When you were brought into the emergency room, I didn't recognize you at first." It wasn't until I saw Gabriel, until I held him, that I began to suspect the truth. "And when did you know for certain?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you told me about trying to contact Mico Rodriguez, when you mentioned Sophia." Mico's voice broke slightly. "I realized that everything you had been searching for was standing right in front of you, and I didn't know how to tell you without it seeming like I had planned it all along." "So instead you chose to lie," Victoria said accusingly. "You chose to insert yourself into our lives under false pretenses. I chose to be Gabriel's nurse because he's my son. I chose to care for Isabella because she's the mother of my child and because I never stopped caring about her." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but whether from anger, relief, or confusion was impossible to determine. "You left," Isabella said finally. "You changed your phone number, you moved away, you made it impossible for me to find you." "I transferred to Riverside General for a better position. I changed my phone when I switched carriers to save money. I had no idea you were trying to reach me. If I had known about Gabriel, if I'd known you were pregnant, I never would have left." "But you did leave," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger. "You ended our relationship and walked away without looking back." "Because I thought you deserved better," Mico replied honestly. "You were grieving your father, dealing with family expectations I couldn't understand. I was a single father, struggling to balance work and raising Sophia. I thought I was doing the right thing by stepping aside and letting you find someone who could give you the stability and security you needed." Victoria had heard enough. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation I was afraid of. Pretty words and emotional appeals designed to make us forget that you've been lying to us for weeks." "I wasn't manipulating anyone," Mico said, turning to face Victoria directly. "I was trying to figure out how to handle an impossible situation. I was trying to do what was best for Gabriel and Isabella. What's best for them is for you to stay away. You've proven that you can't be trusted, that you make decisions that hurt the people who care about you." The argument was spiraling beyond any possibility of reasonable resolution. Isabella stood between them, holding Gabriel, who had begun crying in response to the raised voices and tension in the room. The sound of his distress seemed to break something in all three adults, reminding them that an innocent child was at the center of their conflict. "I think you should leave," Isabella said quietly. "I need time to process all of this." Mico's face crumpled with defeat, but he nodded slowly. "Isabella, I know I've made mistakes, but please don't let them poison you against the possibility that we could be a family. Gabriel deserves to have his father in his life. Gabriel deserves parents they can trust," Victoria said coldly. "That's something you'll have to earn, if it's even possible." As Mico left the office, his shoulders bowed with the weight of his failures, Isabella sank into her chair and finally allowed herself to cry. The man she had been falling in love with all over again was also the man who had broken her heart 2 years ago. The nurse who had been so kind to her and Gabriel was also the father who had been absent during the most difficult months of her life. The 3 months of silence stretched between them like an ocean. Mico threw himself into his work at the hospital, but every delivery room, every crying baby, every new mother reminded him of what he had lost. His daughter Sophia noticed his sadness during their quiet dinners, her 6-year-old wisdom offering small gestures of comfort that broke his heart even more. Isabella found herself standing at her apartment window each evening, watching the hospital lights in the distance. Gabriel had begun showing signs of recognizing faces, and his brightest smiles were reserved for a father he would never remember. Despite Victoria's legal threats and protective barriers, Isabella couldn't forget the way Gabriel had instantly calmed in Mico's arms, and the genuine pain in Mico's eyes when he had tried to explain. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. Gabriel spiked a dangerous fever that wouldn't respond to medication, and Isabella rushed him to Riverside General's emergency department. When Mico saw them arrive, professional instinct overrode personal boundaries. "How long has he been like this?" Mico asked, his hands already checking Gabriel's vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Since last night,"
Isabella replied, her voice tight with fear. The pediatrician said to bring him in if it got worse. As Mico worked to stabilize Gabriel, Isabella watched the focused intensity of a father fighting for his child's life. This wasn't the calculated manipulation Victoria had described. This was raw, desperate love in action.
"Going to be okay," Mico said softly after Gabriel's fever finally broke. "Just a stubborn virus, but he's strong." Victoria arrived an hour later to find Isabella and Mico sitting quietly beside Gabriel's hospital bed, not speaking, but maintaining a careful vigil together. The sight of them as a family unit, despite everything that had happened, stopped her cold. "Thank you for taking care of him," Victoria said to Mico, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "He's my son," Mico replied simply. "I'll always take care of him." The honesty in his statement, delivered without defensiveness or pleading, seemed to shift something in Victoria's rigid stance. She studied the exhausted man who had spent the night ensuring her grandson's recovery, and for the first time she saw past her own protective instincts to recognize genuine paternal devotion. "Isabella," Victoria said carefully, "I think we need to talk. All of us." The conversation that followed in the hospital family conference room was unlike any they had shared before. Without accusations or ultimatums, they simply talked about Gabriel's future, about what kind of life they wanted him to have, about the possibility that trust could be rebuilt through small, consistent actions rather than grand gestures. 6 months later, Sunday dinners at Isabella's apartment had become a cherished tradition. Sophia and Gabriel, despite their age difference, had formed an inseparable bond that delighted both their parents. Victoria, who had initially attended these gatherings with reluctance, now arrived early to help prepare meals and stayed late to read bedtime stories. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Trust had been rebuilt slowly through Mico's unwavering presence at Gabriel's doctor appointments, his patient willingness to answer Victoria's probing questions about his intentions, and his gentle persistence in proving that his commitment wasn't conditional on Isabella's romantic feelings. "I made a lot of mistakes," Mico said to Isabella one evening as they watched their children play together on the living room floor. "But loving you was never one of them." Isabella smiled, reaching for his hand. "Maybe some mistakes are just detours leading us to where we were supposed to be all along." Victoria, overhearing from the kitchen, found herself smiling too. The family she had tried so hard to protect through control and wealth had actually been healed through forgiveness and the simple courage to trust again. Gabriel's first word was "Dada," spoken while reaching for Mico during a family picnic. The joy on Mico's face in that moment was captured in a photograph that Victoria would later frame for her office, replacing the business awards with images of the family that money couldn't buy, but love had built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.